Oh, two people entering the waiting room. We're in the waiting room. Okay. Okay.
You're waiting for the host to start meeting.
Yeah. All right, we'll see if they let us in. 5 people entering the waiting room. Oh, I have the same thing with the waiting room. I have it also.
I just have a big blue square. It says Zoom Workplace, and underneath Rabbi Muskin's Women's Share.
Oh, you're on the phone?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because you could get it if you look in the yesterday's. Well, I don't know if you got. Okay, I'm gonna move this away. I hope he's 5 people entered the waiting room. In other words, he's not letting people in yet. He's not letting people in. Okay. I don't know.
Did you see anything?
What? He's probably not there yet, the rabbi.
Oh, wait a minute, here we go. Rabbi Muskin's Parsha Shiur. Now I see it.
It says recording, but meantime, it doesn't. I don't know. 5 people entered the waiting room. I don't know. I was there. I got them into the waiting room when I have, sure. Yeah, right. Okay, I see that. I see that. Well, 4 people. Okay, maybe he'll let somebody else. Okay, maybe it says recording. I don't know why it says recording. Okay. Okay, let's see. No.
No.
Yeah. So you're not going to go out today? You're not going to go out?
I think I'm just going to go to Sprouts.
Yeah. If you need something, you got to go do it. No.
Yeah, I'm trying to get something from this. Going on already a week.
Yeah. Oh, to get food for the week.
Yeah.
He's not. All right. See you later. See you soon. Bye. See you online. Bye. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, Parshas Vayechi, Perek Mem Tes, Pasuk Chav Zayin. So that is going to take us to page 282. In the Art Scroll, it's 282. We're going from Mem Tes Chav Zayin through Nun Yud Gimel, which is not the entire Shishi, but it's what we're going to be dealing with is really the burying of Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah. But before we do that, we see the very end. 1 second, what's this? Are you sure you'll cancel? Okay, I hope this is recording.
Should say.
Hold on, ladies, 2 seconds. What? It should say?
Should be
It's recording, I think so. Yeah, this is flashing, right? So that's recording.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Okay, very good. Okay, Perek Mem Tes Pasuk Chav Zayin. Let's begin. But before, like I said, before we deal with the burial of Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah, it's the very end of the brachos of Yaakov to the Shvatim. And Binyamin is the last one. So Binyamin Zayd Yitrop Aboker Yochal Ad V'le'erev Yechalek Shalom. He gets the bracha. Binyamin gives the bracha. Yaakov gives the bracha to Binyamin. Binyamin, you're a predatory wolf. In the morning, he will devour his prey, and in the evening, he will distribute its spoils. Then it says, Kol Eila Shiftei Yisrael Pnei Masar, V'zos Asher Diber Lahem Avihem Vayivarech Hosam, Ish Asher Kivrachoso Beirach Hosam. And all these were the tribes of Israel, 12. And this is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them, and he blessed each according to their appropriate bracha. And now he commands them, and he says, I want to be gathered up, and I want to be buried where? In the cave, Asher B'stei Ephron HaChiti. I want to be buried in Maras HaMachpelah. Asher B'stei HaMachpelah, Asher Al Pnei Mamrei. He now really delineates it. Don't make any mistake. In the cave, Asher B'stei HaMachpelah, Asher Al Pnei Mamrei, Beretz Canaan, Asher Kana Avram Es Hasodeh, Meis Ephron HaChiti, La'achuzas Kover. So he clearly says in the cave that it's in the field of Machpelah, which faces Mamrei in the land of Canaan, which Avram bought with the fields of Ephron the Chiti as a burial estate. Shama Kavru Es Avram Ve'Sara Yishto. Shama Kavru Es Yitzchak Ve'Rivka Yishto. Ve'Shama Kavarti Es Leah. There you'll find Avram is buried with his wife Sarah. Yitzchak is buried with his wife Rivka. And Shama, and in that place I already have buried Leah. Miknei Hasodev Hamara Asher Bo Me'es B'nei Ches. And he says, purchase of the field and the cave within it was from the sons of Ches. We purchased it. Yavram bought it. Vayachal Yaakov l'savos b'zbanav v'yasaf raglav l'mitah vayikvav Yosef el amav. And when Yaakov finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet onto his bed. He expired and was gathered to his bed. So that is the death per se. Please 1 second. Let me. Please mute yourselves. Okay. And that is exactly the place where he wants to be buried. Okay, then it goes on. So Yosef was there when his father died. So he fell down on his father's face and he wept over him and he kissed him. Pasuk base. Vayitzav Yosef es avodaves harofim lachanot es aviv vayichantu harofim es Yisrael. And Yosef commanded he ordered his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Yisrael. Vayimalu arba'im yom kain yimlu yimei hachanutim vayivku oso mimitzrayim shivim yom. And he tells us for 40 days they embalmed. It took them that long. They were the masters of embalmment, as we all know. For such is the term of the embalmment. And the Egypt bewailed him for 70 days. They wept. The national mourning for Yaakov was for 70 days. And so they finished. Vayavru yimei v'chiso vayidaber Yosef al beis paro lemor imno matzos yichem beinechem davru na beis bosnei paro lemor. And now, fascinating pasuk. When the morning had passed, Yosef spoke to Pharaoh's household, saying, "If you please, if you have found favor if I have found favor in your eyes, speak now in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, in other words, I need your help. I'm going to ask you to interfere on my behalf to Pharaoh as well. I want you to plead to Pharaoh. And what do I want you to tell him? Avi, my father, Hishbiani, made me swear more. I promised him, I swore to him. He says, I promised my father. My father had made me swear, saying, behold, I'm about to die in my grave, which I have hewn for myself in the land of Canaan. There you are to bury me. Now I will go up, if you please, and bury my father, and then I will return. In other words, convince Pharaoh to sign off the minister of interior to allow me to leave with my father's body to bury him in Israel. So then he continues on. And Paro finally says, yeah, go up and bury your father as he made you swear. So Yosef went up to bury his father. With him went all of Paro's servants, so all of the dead, the elders, but it means more than that. It means entire government, right? In other words, everybody went. All of the dignitaries of the country followed to the Choziknei Eretz Mitzrayim, the whole base Yosef. So everybody followed the coffin. They accompanied it to its burial. Now they didn't go all the way, as you'll say. The whole base Yosef, wrapped upon the Sonam Karamos from the Eretz Goshen. Now all of Yosef's household, his brothers and his father's household, only their young children, their flocks, and their cattle did they leave back in Goshen. Everybody else went. Vayal imo. Vayal imo gam rechav gam paroshim vayhi machane kaved ma'od. Right? And he brought with him chariots and horsemen, and the camp was very imposing. Quite a funeral delegation went. And they went to Goren Ha'atad. This seems to be at the border, and they came to Goren Ha'atad, here, which is across the Jordan, and there they held a very great and imposing eulogy, and he ordained a 7-day mourning period for his father. The family sat Shiva, right? This is the first time we see this in the Torah. Vayar Yosef ha'aretz ha'knani es ha'evel begoren ha'atav vayamru evel kaved zel l'mitzrayim v'alken karosh shema of el mitzrayim asher be'ever ha'yarden. And when the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning in Goren Ha'atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning for Egypt. Therefore it was named Evel Mitzrayim, which is across from Jordan. And the last pasuk, Vayas banov lo ka'asher tzivam, and his sons did for him exactly as he had instructed him. So what do we see in these psukim? In these psukim, the psukim from Perek Nun Tes, pasuk Chav Zayin, through Perek Nun, pasuk Yud Gimel, the major story in these psukim deal with the burying of Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah, as Yaakov had requested. The Rav studies these psukim first to discern a true picture of what the Torah wanted us to appreciate about Yaakov's burial. That's first of all. What exactly was the honor that was bestowed upon Yaakov? That the Rav wants to understand. What exactly does the Torah telling us about the burial? Well, the honor showed to Yaakov on his last rites. And the second lesson the Rav wanted us to discern is what we can appreciate pertaining to Jewish mourning practices, because this is the first time in the Torah that we have mourning of anybody. At Chayei Sarah, we had the burial of Sarah, but we were not told how Avram or Yitzchak, the father, the husband or the son, really mourned their father, their mother, or their wife. Here, the Torah offers us a glimpse into the mourning practices, way beyond just burial, right? Chayei Sarah is about burial. This is about mourning. So the Rav therefore studies these psukim for what he can glean from the text that helped mold our mourning practices to this very day. Again, this major concern is the the entire topic of burial of Yaakov and mourning for Yaakov. But before we begin that, the Torah did what? It finished the brachos of Yaakov for the Shvatim. So let's take a look quickly at those for few psukim, and then we'll go into the story of the burial itself. Take a look at Memtes Chavches. What?
I can't hear him. Oh, somebody already wrote.
Can't hear you, Rabbi. You're muted. You're muted.
Did you not hear me until now?
No.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you were muted.
Now I hear you. Just a little period there that you were muted.
I don't know why. Okay, let's start. Okay, so we're on Pasuk Chavches. Sorry for all of these problems. Today is just like the weirdest day that I can remember in Los Angeles history, with all of the fires going on not so far from here. It's crazy. What?
It's like it's gonna rain, but it's just.
It looks like it's going to rain, but it's just smog. It's just the
Smog.
ash in the air. It's just terrible. Anyhow, so let's take a look. I'm sorry. So Binyamin gets his bracha, and then it says, Kol ele, Pasuk Chavches, Kol ele, Shifti Yisrael, Shnei Masar, V'zos asher tiber lohem Aviyam v'yivarech osam, Ish asher kivrachosam v'yirach osam. Pasuk 28. All of these are the tribes of Israel, 12. This is what their father spoke to them, and he blessed them. He blessed each according to his appropriate blessing. There's a lot of redundancy in this pasuk. We're told that these are the 12. They got their bracha. Yeah, they got their bracha. What's going on in this bracha? So first, the Rav points out that, interesting, Yaakov identifies in his brachos here in Vayechi who Yehuda is, who Malchus will be, right? Kingdom is given to Yehuda. That Yaakov does. But what does Yaakov not do? Yaakov never bestows the kahuna. The kahuna is not given to Levi by Yaakov. Yaakov gives Malchus royalty to Yehuda, but he does not endow Levi in Parshas Vayechi with the kahuna. And that is given where? That is given in Vizos HaBrocha by Moshe in Perek Lamed Gimel Pasuk Ches in Vizos HaBrocha. Yoru mishpatecha liYaakov v'sorascha liYisrael. Levi is going to become the Kohen, the tribe of Kahuna, and that waits until Vizos HaBrocha at the very end of Devarim. So the Rav notes that the two sets of brachos, the brachos of Yaakov and the brachos of Moshe, are connected, in particular with one word. How did this, here it says, Kol Leila Shiftei Yisrael, Shnei Masar. What's the next word? Vizos, Asher Diber Lahem. Right? He ends the brachos for the 12 tribes. Yaakov ends the brachos with the word Vizos, if you will. How does Moshe begin his brachos? Vizos HaBracha. And this is not by accident, and the Rav points out. Moshe, what Yaakov started, Moshe ends, right? They're connected. It's one long continuum. Yaakov and Yosef's bracha are all connected. Moshe continued where Yaakov left off, in particular by appointing kahuna to Levi, which Yaakov did not do. And what does it mean when it says Vayevarech osam ish asher kivrkoso beirach osam, and bless them, each man according to his blessing he blessed them? This sounds very repetitive. And the Rav notes, Yaakov blessed each son according to his individual personality. The Rav quotes the Ramban. The Ramban says the Shvatim were a diverse group of men, each having his own strong and unique personality. Often these personalities clashed with each other, which we know. Each one was personality on its own. He's a world on his own. each one of the Shvatim were unbelievably unique and powerful men. And they would quite often clash. What this pasuk is telling us at the very end of Yaakov's life, at the very end of the brachos, is he's telling them, not only did I give you a bracha individually, and each one you have a bracha that's unique to yourselves. I'm giving you a collective bracha. You should fuse yourselves individually into a unit called Knesset Yisrael. But you got to do it by combining all of your talents together. The individual brachos were, like the Rav says, ingredients in a recipe. Each ingredient, you need each ingredient, right? What if I keep out one ingredient? Usually the recipe doesn't work, right? It doesn't taste the way it should. It doesn't come out just right. If you leave an ingredient out, something is not going to be perfect. What Yaakov was telling his sons is that although they each individually are very impressive and bigger than life figures, in many ways, they still should have tolerance for each other and fuse together into one recipe called Knesset Yisrael. Knesset Yisrael is going to only flourish if the individuals are willing to shrink a little, if you will. And with these words, that's what the bracha is ending with. This is what these words mean. Yes, he gave each individual a bracha, but he gave them a collective bracha as well, that they should work together. And this is what's happening in this bracha. And with this ends the brachos of Yaakov's sons. And now what happens? Yaakov dies, and then the story of his burial occurs. But take a look now. It continues on. Take a look now into Memtes Lamed Aleph. He tells them, he instructs them, okay, I need to be buried in where? Maras HaMachpelah. But then he notes, the Torah notes, Shama Kavru es Avram Pasuk Lamed Aleph. He tells them, I want to be buried in Machpelah. But then he says something fascinating. Shama Kavru es Avram ve'es Sarai Ishto. Shama Kavru es Yitzchak ve'es Rivka Ishto. V'shama Kavarti es Leah. There's a preposition that's constantly repeated here, the word ve'es. Ve'es appears before Sarah, before Rivka, right? And before Leah. And that is not by accident. Grammatically, you didn't need that preposition. You do not need to write this pasuk with the word ve'es in front of each word, in front of each woman's name. You could have written easily, Ishto, Kama Kavru Avram v'Ishto, Kama Kavru Yitzchak v'Ishto. No, that's not what happens here. It identifies each one of the women. Shama Kavru es Avram. It doesn't say v'Ishto. What does it say? V'es Sarah, Ishto, and Sarah, his wife. He could have easily dropped two words, right? It should have said Shama Kavru es Avram v'Ishto. Shama Kavru es Yitzchak v'Ishto. V'Shama Kavarti es Leah. That's right, but you don't, right? So why does it do that? So the Rav notes that that's not by accident at all. Chazal teach us, yes, grammatically it was not required, but grammatically is not what's issue here. What's issue is the message. This is telling us that as long as they were married to each other, they were a team and they were powerful. As soon as one dies, the team ends and greatness ends with it. For example, he says in the famous words of the Rav, Sarah was an equal and indispensable partner of Avram in the covenant and in the propagation of faith. Without Sarah, Avram wasn't Avram. Without Yitzchak and Rivka together, without Rivka, Yitzchak wasn't Rivka. Without Rachel and Leah, Yaakov wasn't Yaakov. That's exactly what the Torah is telling us. Back in Chayei Sarah, the Rav noted this. If you remember when we learned Chayei Sarah, that Sarah dies 38 years before Avram dies. She's 127. He's 10 years older. That's 137. He dies at 175. That's 38 years after she dies, he dies. What happens during those 38 years? Only two things. We're told. We're told he appoints Eliezer to go get a wife for Yitzchak, and he marries Keturah. That's all he does in 38 years. The great, creative, powerful Avram does almost nothing with 38 years that he's left with without Sarah. And why, the Rav says? Because the team was no longer together. Rachel's not buried there. Rachel's okay. Rachel's not buried, and we're told she dies before they ever get to Hebron. Right. She's died on the way. She buries on the way.
You don't sense the closeness with Yaakov and Leah.
No, but they still wore the mothers, the imahos were together. Remember, he does not leave Lot until he has them sign off, right? Okay. So that's why it says v'es. We're told that he's buried in exactly the same place where Avram, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, and Yaakov and Leah are going to be buried in Maras HaMachpelah, because it's telling us that they were teams, right? Now, Memtes Lamed Gimel, continue on. Vayichal Yaakov litzavos es banav. He concludes litzavos. Litzavos here can mean instruction. Yes, it also can mean tzavah, giving the will and testament, right? He concludes. What does this mean? The word tzavah doesn't only mean command, Rav Soloveitchik notes. It means transferring authority to the next generation. In a will and testament, which is called in Hebrew tzavah, one transfers to the next generation the authority to carry on where one leaves off, right? That's exactly what happens in a tzavah. Here it means
It sounds heavier
Generation
than
of the
regular
tree.
helicopter.
The whole house is shaking. The whole house is shaking.
Everybody okay?
And that was the helicopter. that just-
It
Yeah.
wasn't an earthquake. They just said on
Okay.
the thing, it was not an earthquake.
No, it was not. It
Helicopter.
was an helicopter. It was a helicopter. Okay. This is a
It's-
crazy
it's-
day, as we said.
It's President Biden flying around.
Okay. Guys, let's get back to the shiur. Here it means, what is Savav? Vayichal Yaakov litzavos says banav. He's transferring to the next generation the authority that he's
I'm
leaving
thinking
them
maybe
with.
crop duster,
Here-
you know, to put out the flames.
Okay. Okay, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, good. Okay. Here, tzavah means Yaakov transferred to the next generations the traditions of the Avos. Each son was assigned his role in Knesset Israel. And with that, now we begin the story of Yaakov's burial. With that pasuk Lamed Gimel, then we begin the story of Yaakov's burial. And the Rav, he never goes pasuk by pasuk. That's not the pasuk, the purpose here. He wants to create a picture of what the story was. So jump to pasuk Hey. He turns, remember, what does Yosef do? In Yosef, first and foremost, which is not important to us, to this story, Yosef instructs the Egyptians to show Yaakov the kavod that they would have shown their own, and they do embalmment. Okay, something that we would never do today, fine. But this is pre-Torah, and this is pre-Sinai, and that's fine. So now what happens? He then turns to the people of Pari, to the entire government, to the administration, but he's the most important person. He shouldn't have to do that, should he? That's what's bothering the Rav. What does he do here? He turns to his underlings and he says, do me a favor. Would you intercede on my behalf with Paro? What Yosef himself can intercede on his own behalf. He has direct communication with Paro. So now take a look, and he says, Avi Ishpiani Lemor. Hine anochi meis b'kivri asher karisi li beretz Canaan shama tikpereni v'ata eleno ve'ekbera es avi v'ashuva. Pasuk Hey. My father had adjured me, and he made me swear, behold, I am about to die in my grave, which I have hewn for myself in the land of Canaan. Where am I going to be buried? Not in Egypt. I'm going to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. There you are to bury me. Now I will go up, if you please, and bury my father, and then I will return. What's happening here? What's happening is Yosef realizes that this is the biggest insult to Egypt. That's what he realizes. Yosef turns to everybody to help him that has any influence on Paro to convince Paro not to take this as an insult. That's what's happening in this puzzle. He will not be able to leave Egypt with Yosef, with Yaakov's body, unless the head of the government, Paro, signs off. He therefore words the request as fulfilling what? How does he place it? His fathers swore him to do this, right? He was under oath to do this. And the Rav said, I can totally understand this puzzle in light of a story I heard from the family of Edmund de Rothschild, right? And he repeats it. We mentioned this in Chaye Sarah, but here he gives the full story as follows, and I quote the Rav. Edmund de Rothschild, the well-known French philanthropist, wanted to be buried in Israel, but his wish would not be immediately acted upon because hostilities happened in 1948 with the War of Independence. Although he was buried in France, when conditions in Israel permitted, the Rothschild children made a request to de Gaulle that, and through the French Interior Ministry, that he be reinterred in Israel. The time passed, and they did not receive the request, the approval. After some inquiries, this is the Rothschild family, the wealthiest family in France. After some inquiries, they were told that President de Gaulle himself told the Interior Minister that he's not to sign off. De Gaulle said no. When asked, de Gaulle responded that he was troubled by the request. He had considered Edmund de Rothschild, a loyal Frenchman. A true Frenchman, quote unquote, de Gaulle, is born, lives, and dies, and is buried on a French soil. That's a good Frenchman. Rothschild's request was therefore troubling to de Gaulle. And although de Gaulle eventually acceded to the family's request, he did finally accede, and Edmund de Rothschild is buried in Zichron Yaakov. His opinion of the family Rothschild as Frenchmen was irrevocably diminished, Rabbi Soloveitchik recounted. He was very upset to his dying day. He says those, Jews are not really loyal Frenchmen. Yosef's dilemma was similar, the Rav writes. He had spent many years as the viceroy of Egypt, was considered a true Egyptian. How could he possibly want to have his father buried in a foreign land? Yosef therefore wished to communicate to Paro that it was because he took an oath to his father, compelled to accede to Yaakov's wish. He wouldn't have done it on his own, which he's suggesting. Paro, don't take this as an insult. I'm only doing this, why? Because my father insisted and he made me swear that I'm going to do this. That's why this is all happening. And that's why he's doing what? He's using all of his influence on Paro as much as possible to get Paro to agree to something that really is quite insulting. But Paro agrees. Go ahead. And then he says, how does the Torah respond? And Paro says, excuse me, go up and bury your father as he adjured you. I understand you took a shvuah. That's the only reason I'm letting you do it.
Father made you make this.
My father made you make the shvuah. I understand that. He says, I get it. And that's the only reason I'm signing off. He's like de Gaulle, right? That's the only reason I'm signing off. Continue on. Now, Pasuk Zayin. Vayal Yosef likbor es aviv. And Yosef now goes, right? Vayal Yosef. So Yosef went up to bury his father. Who went with him? Vayalu ito kol avdei Paro, and with him all of Paro's servants, ziknei veso, all of the elders of the household, v'chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim, and all of the elders of the land of Egypt. If you stop to think about it, this is amazing. Paro commanded his entire government to mourn the death of Yaakov. It would be like the president of the United States announcing, right now we're going through Carter's burial, but he was president of the United States, right? But what happens when a president announces a national mourning day? The entire country mourns. All flags are to be at half-mast. All federal buildings are closed. That's exactly what's happening in Egypt. It's happening tomorrow here, right? What motivated this reaction by Paro in honor of Yaakov? And the Rav explained that Paro clearly was enchanted by Yosef. Yosef, ever since Yosef deciphered his dreams and offered the brilliant plan to implement how to save the entire Middle East of their time, Paro considered Yosef hands down the most brilliant thinker living in Egypt. He was the most brilliant leader living in Egypt. But that fact made him realize Yosef couldn't have come to this alone. Yosef was the DNA. Where did the DNA come from? The father of Yosef. And Yosef's father dies. I have to honor him because he's the one who gave birth to Yosef, if you will. His DNA is in Yosef. And Yosef is only Yosef because of Yaakov. And that's why Paro now honors Yaakov accordingly. Continue on. And it goes now to Posuk Tes. Vayal imo gam rechev gam horoshim vayi amachane kaved meod. And what happens? And he brought him up with both chariots and horsemen, and the camp was very imposing. It was quite an impressive scene. The entourage that went out with Yaakov's burial, with Yaakov's coffin, was quite impressive. A machaneh kaved meod. It was very numerous. A lot of people joined. These words describe a phenomenon that we often see in life, the Rav notes. Who made up this large group? Who demonstrated in honor of honoring? Who accompanied the coffin of Yaakov? Who went out in the big entourage? It says kaved meod. That means it must have been the simple and the regular Egyptian citizen. Tell me, the Rav wonders, did they have an interaction with Yaakov? Did they know Yaakov on a personal level? Not at all. They never saw Yaakov, most probably. They never had, and remember, this is before modern TV, right? They didn't see him. They might have heard, yeah, they heard of him. The viceroy's father. But did they have any personal relationship with him? No. Often the simple person realizes greatness in truly great individuals and responds accordingly. That's exactly what's happening. This is exactly what happened here. They did not interact directly with Yaakov, and yet they showed Yaakov this great honor because they realized Yaakov was greatness. They didn't need to know Yaakov personally. They understood there are great men in the world, and Yaakov meets the bill, if you will. And they joined the entourage just because of that.
They also say that it was because of, they saw the greatness in Yosef, and therefore he.
Yes, clearly, right, 100%. Now, continue on to Pasuk Yud. Vayavo ad Goren Ha'atad, and they go to Goren Ha'atad, Asher be'ever ha'yarden, vayispedu sham mispeit gadol v'chaved ma'od. And there they hold the funeral service, right? It's like, what they're going to do tomorrow. They're taking his coffin to Washington, and they're going to hold in the cathedral and et cetera, a major service. And then what? It's right. So it's saying we're going to Tavay Amru, Abel Kaved Zel Mitzrayim. I'm sorry, I skipped. Vayispedu sham mispeit gadol v'chaved ma'od. And there they had the great service, the great memorial service. Vayas le'aviv Avel Shivas Yamim. And here they sat. This is the first time we have in the Torah any mention of a mourning period for 7 days. There are Geonim and there are some Rishonim who argued that our Avelus of Shiva is a biblical command. The great Rambam disagrees. He says 7 days is not the Oraisa. The first day, the day of death, which is the day of Aninus, right? Usually it should be the day of burial as well. That first day is the only day that is the Oraisa. Excuse me. Oh, it's okay. I'm gonna. I'll survive.
Yeah.
And the rest of the 7 days is the Rabbanon according to the Rambam. 6 days. I mean, the first day is the Oraisa according to the Rambam. The rest of the time is the Rabbanon. What does the Rambam do with this pasuk? It clearly notes it. Evel Shivas Yamim. The Rambam states there's a principle known as Nitna Torah V'nischadsha Halacha. When the Torah was given at Sinai, all the mitzvos that were mentioned before Sinai that were repeated after Sinai become the Oraisa. And for example, Milah. Milah is mentioned in Parshas Lech Lecha, but then it's mentioned again in Parshas Tazria. So it's mentioned after Parshas Yisro, after Torah, after Sinai, it becomes biblical. If it was only mentioned, the Rambam notes, before Sinai and not repeated, it no longer it does not become biblical. And which would that be, the Rambam says? Avelus of Shivas Yamim, the 7 mourning days that they observed. The 7 mourning days is mentioned in Parshas Vayechi, but is it repeated after Parshas Yisro? It's never repeated again. Therefore, the Rav argues that's exactly what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam noted that there's a contradiction, however, in the Rambam. Rav noted there's a contradiction in the Rambam. The Rambam ruled that a mourner is prohibited from bringing a korban. You hear that? That's the halacha in the Rambam. All 7 days, the mourner is prohibited from bringing a korban. If Avelus is only 1 day de Oraisa, why would the halacha forbid the Avel from bringing a korban all the rest of the 7 days? He should be able to bring the korban to the Beis Hamikdash the other 7 days. Fine, the first day is the Oraisa, the other 6 days is the Rabbanon, and he should be able to bring the korban. The Rav explained the Rambam in a brilliant fashion. The Ravs noted that the Rambam is dividing Avelus in 2 distinct aspects. One he calls Isurei Avelus, the actions that the Avel must observe. For example, you sit on a lower chair, right? You wear non-leather shoes, etc., etc. That's one aspect of Avelus. It's called Isurei Avelus. But then there is a distinct second category in Avelus that the Rav named Gavra of Avelus. Gavra of Avelus means the person's status as a mourner. The status as a mourner is distinct from the prohibitions that are required to be observed. When the Rambam said Avelus is only 1 day from the Bible, from the Oraisa, he was referring to Isurei Avelus, the laws that the Avel observes. Those were only biblically required for 1 day. We have to sit on the lower floor 1 day biblically. However, one is a Gavra of Avelus for 7 days. You have the status of Avelus for 7 days. The status of a mourner lasts for 7 days, and therefore he cannot be in joy. And if he cannot be in joy, therefore he cannot bring a korban, because you only can bring a korban during the days when you have a sense of joy. If you don't have a sense of joy, you can't bring a korban. Again, the Rav is dividing the 2 categories, Avelus, into 2, right? There is the category of the days of prohibition, specifically Avelus prohibitions, like sitting on the floor, wearing non-leather shoes. That, the Rav argues, is 1 day mida oraisa. What about the status of Avelus? The human being's personality is impacted by Avelus. That's 7 days. And that explains, he calls it, right? Gavra of Avelus lasts 7 days. And that explains why the Avel cannot bring a korban during all 7 days, even though only the first day is the Oraisa. The Rav noted that now we can understand another halacha. When we observe Yomim Tovim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and you are a mourner before any of those holidays start, what happens? It ends. Why does it end? Because simultaneously, You can't have a Yom Tov celebrant and a Gavra of Avelut. A Gavra of Avelut and the Yom Tov celebrant conflict. You can't be within the state of mind of Avelus and the state of mind of joy of Yom Tov. And these two are antithetical. Therefore, what happens when the state of Avelus encounters the state of Yom Tov? They can't live together. And what ends? The Avelus ends, the Gavra of Avelus ends, and Yom Tov sets in.
Somebody contemplated sharing Yom Tov.
During Yom Tov, it's a different halacha. During Yom Tov, we push it off until after Yom Tov, right? The Ram.
Is the Gavra going to be a Rabbi? Is the status of Gavra?
No, the Gavra of Avelus is a Da'araisa.
It is a Rabbi.
It's a Da'araisa. That is a Da'araisa. When Yom Tov encounters it, it ends. Because you have another Da'araisa that just will not live with it. That's why. The Rambam argues that Moshe Rabbeinu took the initiative to reinstitute the 7-day Shiva period in order to retain the Gavra aspect of mourning. You hear this? Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rambam argues that Moshe Rabbeinu took the initiative to reinstitute the 7-day period in order that the Gavra Avelus is in existence. But Moshe also did the same, by the way, the Gemara tells us, for a Chassan and Kala. He instituted Shiva Yemei Mishta. And the Rav wondered, you're telling me he gave both days, the Avelus and the Chassan Kala, 7 days. It seems that there's a connection. What is the connection? And the Rav notes, of course, there is a connection. You can't have Sheva Brachos and you can't have Shiva Yemei Avelus without realizing that they both respond to a status of the human being called loneliness. They both resolve loneliness. The Avel is confronted with the ultimate loneliness, and the Chassan and Kala, until they find each other, are lonely human beings. And the Rav said, that's why Moshe said, there's Shiva Yemei Mishta, there's 7 Sheva Brachos, 7 days of Sheva Brachos, and there's 7 days of Avelus. They're very connected psychologically. They respond to the same human concern called loneliness. The Rav points out that if you read the story carefully, you find there were 2 sets of mourners, and they were nothing alike. Go back to Pasuk Zayin. Pasuk Zayin says what? Vaya'alu ito kol avdei paro ziknei beso v'chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim. This group was sent by whom? Who do they represent? Paro. Quite often we send in a state funeral, what is the president? Very rarely does the president and the first lady go to a foreign dignitary's death, funeral, right? Once in a while you hear it. What? You send the vice president, you send a delegation. You send a delegation very rarely, unless there was a very special relationship, right? When Rabin was killed. So, what? I'm sorry?
Begin went.
No,
Begin went.
when Rabin was killed, I'm sorry, Clinton went. Clinton spoke. Shalom Chaver, right? Because that was an enormously tragic situation, and it had a great world impact. And so therefore he came for whatever reason he came. But very rarely does the president himself go. Paro doesn't go, but what does Paro do? He sends his delegation. This group was sent to represent Paro. When they do their job and it finishes, what do? They go home. When does that happen? At the border of Egypt with Israel. As soon as they are finished, they go home. They don't go. If I was to ask you, did they go all the way to the Maras HaMachpelah? No, they did not. Who went to the Maras HaMachpelah? The second group. Who's the second group? Vayasu Bonovlo Kain Kasher Tzivam in Pasuk Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, right? Vayasu Bonov Lo Kain Kasher Tzivam. Who is that? That's Yosef and his brothers and their family. Yosef and his family, they are the real mourners. They mourn and they do the Shiva, and they don't leave Yaakov until he's buried. Exactly. They are the ones mentioned in Pasuk Yud Gimel that carried Yaakov into Eretz Canaan and buried him in Marat HaMachpelah. Not the dignitaries, not the delegation of Paro. The delegation of Paro finished their job. What was their job? To show honor to Yaakov. And where does that end? At the border of Egypt with Eretz Yisrael. The Egyptians showed their respect, accomplished, goodbye, good riddance, right? And that is why in Pasuk Yudalit, only Yosef and his family returned to Egypt from Eretz Yisrael, right? Take a look. And they all went up to Yaakov, I mean Yosef and his brothers went up to the Maras Machpelah. They buried. Now, Pasuk Yudalet, Vayoshav Yosef Mitzrayim Hu ve'echov v'chol ha'olim ito likbor es aviv. And Yosef returned to Mitzrayim, he and his brothers and all those that went up to bury their father, who went up to them, their families, whoever their sons, right? The grandsons, the great-grandsons, all of them went up to Hebron to bury Yaakov. After they finished, only after they finished the burial did they return. So the Rav has done a number of things for us in this in this portion from Chayei Sarah. I'm sorry, I said Chayei Sarah, from Vayechi. He has demonstrated, first of all, the very beginning, the last portion of the brachos of Yaakov for his sons, and he notes that the continuity, the continuation, the connection between this parsha and Vizos HaBracha is one and the same, right? Vizos, and he said, in this parsha, Yaakov gave Malchus to Yehuda, but he did not give Kahuna to Levi. That's going to be happening at the end of Chumash Devarim in Vizos HaBracha. Moshe does that. And then the Rav studied very carefully what kind of Avelus occurred in memory of Yaakov. First of all, he noted that Yaakov insisted that he be buried where? Maras HaMachpelah, where? Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. Why? Because the Avos were not individuals. They were married men, and when they were a team, they were productive. When they weren't a team, their productivity literally ended. That's what the Rav points out. Point one. Point two, the Rav notes that he has to convince Paro to agree to allow his father to be buried in Mitzrayim, in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because this, he realizes, may very well be interpreted by Paro as a tremendous insult. And so how does he do it? Number one, he gains everybody's support around the government, right? He says to underlings of his, he says, I want you to pitch the idea to Paro. Why are you pitching the idea to Paro? Because this is the ultimate insult. Like the Rav noted with Edmund de Rothschild and de Gaulle. He says, I get this parsha very well when I realize Edmund de Rothschild and de Gaulle's story. Then the Rav noted, but it says that they sat. So who went? A whole delegation from Paro went. Fine. But who else went? Yaakov's family, Yosef's brothers and their families are a distinct, different group. And they are going to go all the way through the burial. And the Rav spent quite a bit of time on noting, what does it mean that they sat Shiva? Yosef and his brother. They did, that's correct. They sat Shiva before the funeral. That's right. That's not halachically the way, clearly, we do it differently. Okay, so Yaakov, so the Rav notes, what is the Shiva about? The Shiva, many Rishonim and Gaonim claim that Shiva, like we observe to this very day, comes from here. And it's Doraisa. The Rambam disagreed. The Rambam said no. Shiva on the first day is the Araisa. Aninus is the Araisa for one day, the day of burial, the day of death. But the Shiva is the Rabbanan. So then the Rav dealt with, there's the contradiction. Why shouldn't he be able to bring an Avel, a Karban all 7 days? And the Rav answered, there are 2 categories for the Rambam. The Rambam is dividing the personality of Avelus, that's 7 days. The Isure Avelus, the Minhoge Avelus, the customs and the rituals of Avelus is when? 1 day. We do, but is it Daraisa or not? There's that whole debate in the Rishonim. The Rambam says, no, it's not Daraisa. We don't keep a Daraisa of 7 days. We keep. The Rabbanan is just as important as Daraisa, but we keep, but it might not be Daraisa, and then it has different categories, etc. and ramifications, la halacha, if there are other needs conflicting. What happens if a person's very poor and he has to work? How do we resolve that during Shiva? Okay, we do. Okay, so that's Parshas Vayechi, and next week we'll begin Chumash Shemos. Hard to believe we're already getting to it.
Rabbi,
I want you to know that this week we have a phenomenal scholar in residence, a unique individual. And you should really try to hear. He doesn't have the name recognition here in America that he certainly deserves, but he will gain that. He's a genius of geniuses. He's born in England. He speaks a beautiful English. You don't have to worry about that. This is not an Israeli. He is a tremendous self-taught Talmud Chacham. He was a dayan on the Bezdin of Rav Asher Weiss in Eretz Yisrael. He also then went to Hebrew University Law School on his own, and he became a professor at Hebrew University Law School, where he's a professor. He's a major Haredi thinker, and he writes you can Google him, he writes a journal called Sarach Iyun, where his major contention is that the Haredi community has to grow up, and they have to finally become citizens of the state of Israel. They have to identify with the civic responsibility, and he personally feels that they should be in the army.
Is he accepted as?
He's by some, in Haredi, it matters who, it matters what, but he's certainly having an influence. He's not he was a dayan on Asher Weiss's best, and he was also a consultant to the chief rabbinate on halacha. He's a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He's a tremendous scholar, and he is so well read. It is unbelievable. The man is a genius of geniuses, and he's a delight to know. He's just a very approachable individual. I've met him, and he's a delight. So it's a very special Shabbos because you don't get these opportunities that often. Okay,
Rabbi, I have
that's
a question. I don't know if someone brought it up already regarding Yaakov and Leah and Rachel. So when you were talking about teams, I know she was buried along the way. So
right.
how does that work out? Because he had 2 wives.
Yeah, he did. He had 2 teams, if you will. That's correct. Not totally equal. Clearly much more dependent upon Rachel and his relationship with Rachel. And when Rachel does die, it really ends. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you got it.
Rabbi,
Everybody should have a wonderful and safe day.
thank you. I didn't think we were
Okay.
going to have in the shul. That's why I didn't show up.
Yeah, no, we're Baruch Hashem. Okay, next week we'll be back to normal, hopefully.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.